Okay, good to see all of you. Good morning. We are going to begin. We are on page Yud Beis, Amud Beis, page 12b.
Can I ask you something before we start?
Yeah, sure.
Are they're talking about ritual fringes? Is that the same as tzitzis?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
it means tzitzis and the talus. Both of them are considered
They're the same, right?
tzitzis. Yeah, they're both under the same category. Correct.
All right, thank you.
So yesterday we learned about the story of Shmuel and Shaul. We learned a number of teachings that if a person is embarrassed from his sin, it is considered an atonement. And the Gemara brought one pasuk from Yechezkel, but the Gemara said maybe that's not a good source because that's talking about a complete community, a congregation. And therefore, the Gemara brought the story of Shaul HaMelech, where he was embarrassed that he did not ask the Urim V'Tumim. No, I'm sorry, he was embarrassed about that he killed the city of Noiv, and therefore he didn't mention about asking the Urim V'Tumim. So, and on that, the Gemara said that the Gemara explained that even though he killed out the city of Noiv HaKoyanim, but because he was embarrassed, he was atoned. How do we know that he was actually atoned? So the Gemara had two proofs. One was because it says, "You will be with me tomorrow. You will be with me." Shmuel told that to Shaul, and Rabbi Yochanan said, "Imi means you will be in my portion of the world to come, Olam Haba. You will be with me in Gan Eden." And the rabbis had a different source, and their source was, it says, Bechir Hashem, that because the Gevinim who were angry that Shaul had ruined their livelihood and he had killed 7 of their members, they wanted to take revenge. And David HaMelech said, this is not a Jewish thing to take revenge, but you people want to take revenge against Shaul. We will do it. We have to appease you. And nevertheless, you will not be able to marry into our families. And at that point, they had, during that story, they had told David, the Gevinim told David that we want you to kill 7 of the children of Shaul, the Bechir Hashem. We said it can't be, he was saying that these Gevinim were calling Shaul the chosen one of Hashem. That doesn't make sense that they would give such honor. So therefore, it must be that it was a baskol, that a heavenly voice called out and said, Shaul is the Bechir Hashem, meaning he's atoned for. Why is he atoned for? So the Gemara here sees this to mean that he was atoned for because he was atoned for because he had been embarrassed. Now, there is a question on this Gemara, and that is that maybe he was atoned because he had died. Maybe the death was really an atonement. How do you know he was atoned because he was embarrassed? Maybe he was atoned for because of his death. So if you think of it that way, then we don't have a proof anymore that embarrassment brings atonement, because really death should be the atonement. So I have this sefer, I have this book from a rabbi in Fall River, Rhode Island, who would have ever dreamed that he would write a book on the tractate Brochos, but it's a paperback book. And he mentions this question very interestingly. It was bothering me yesterday that, it's not, the proof is a little questionable. If you could, maybe he died because of, maybe he was atoned for because of his death. We know his death was an atonement. Now, I should mention that Shaul did have 5 sins. And one of them was that he had asked this witchcraft lady, about bringing up Shmuel. So that was considered a sin. So that answers one of the questions that we had yesterday. So I just want to mention that. The other sins that he had was that he had not waited for Shmuel. He didn't kill Agag, who he was supposed to, by Amalek. He didn't kill the women, the children, and the animals, and the king of Amalek, Agag. So that was another sin, and killing out the city of Noiv. So these were all parts of his sins anyway. But it mentions that he was embarrassed about the killing of Noiv, and that therefore he was atoned. So over here he explains. Well, he brings it's a Maharsha that he brings that he lost his kingship by not killing Amalek. So that was the atonement for the Amaleks, and these were the 2 main sins, Amalek and Noiv. Now, so he's got this other sin left. And so we assume that he was atoned for by the embarrassment. But why not from maybe the death? So he brings down that people who are killed in judgment, Haruge Malchus, that is considered an atonement. If someone dies by the court, they don't get that's not an atonement. And Shaul HaMelech died because of a heavenly judgment against him, and therefore it's not considered an atonement. So for some reason, being that he had a heavenly judgment against him, that he had to die in this war, that would not have been an atonement. The atonement was his embarrassment. That would have been the atonement. There are certain deaths that are considered atonement, and other deaths are not. And it's based on a Talmud in Sanhedrin, page 46. And because of that, the conclusion is that it's not considered a atonement, his death. Therefore, we have to say that the atonement is the fact that he was embarrassed. So that's the Gemara of yesterday. Actually, no, there was one more piece that we started, and that was that the rabbis had thought about establishing the portion of Balak in Kriya Shema. And if you look at the portion of Balak that the rabbis thought of adding, it's actually 95 verses. So it's quite a large addition to the Shema. And the rabbi said, no, we can't add that. That's a huge portion. It's a Toirach Tzibor. Does anyone know what Toirach Tzibor means?
Pain in the ass.
Well,
technically burden on the community.
It's a burden for the community. Thank you, Howard. So that is the reason why the rabbis didn't add Parshas Balak, even though it has a few verses that are very connected to the Shema, and the Gemara brings them. And there's actually a discussion which ones, because on the side there's another version, but they talk about going to sleep and waking up, and the idea of waking up with alacrity to say the Shema, and the idea of the last thing a person does at night is says the Shema, wakes up in the morning, says the Shema. And so the Gemara then asked, so maybe just say those verses, that one verse that either with this version of the verse or the other version, which verse it is, but just say one verse. That's very apropos for the Shema. Why don't we just do that? And so the Gemara answered a reason. Why do we need to say the whole paragraph? Does anyone know what that reason is?
It talks about the exodus from Egypt, that the Gemara wants, in other words, they wanted to say about to mention God who brought us out of Egypt.
That was an earlier piece. I sort of skipped that line, but I'm glad you bring it up. The Gemara earlier said, what is the reason to establish? Why would you want to establish this portion? Is it because it mentions that Hashem took us out of Egypt, but there's other portions that also mention Hashem took us out of Egypt? It must be because it talks about the Shema. And that's why we want to say it. It has these verses that talk about the Shema, waking up in the morning, waking up, going to sleep like a lion, waking up like a lion. So the Gemara concluded that we can't just do that one verse because, anyone know?
No.
Why don't we just
I believe
do
there's
the
a
one
concept
verse?
that you can't just take a verse out of the Torah. If it's not that way, if it's not written that way in the Torah, you can only divide up sections the way it's divided up in the Torah.
You can't just take one verse. Thank you. That's right. And even though we sometimes do just learn one verse, but that's because we're going to continue afterwards. But here you want to just add this one verse to the Shema, that's a problem. And that answers why on Mondays and Thursdays we could do like a small portion of the Torah reading, even though it might not be the end of the paragraph. And the reason is because we're going to be finishing it on Shabbos. So therefore, it's not considered that we're just taking one verse out of the paragraph. We're just starting, but we'll actually finish later. But here, if we're going to put one verse in the Shema, that's going to be a problem because that one verse is not going to, we're not going to finish the paragraph. We're just going to be saying that one verse. Now, there is another explanation of why on Mondays and Thursdays we can do not a full paragraph. And that is that there is another exception to this rule. What is the exception? The exception to this rule is that even if Moshe did not divide it into paragraphs, even if the Torah doesn't have it divided, if it's a separate topic, you are allowed to stop and just say that. It's when it's one topic, you can only divide it if Moshe divided it. If in the Torah it's divided, even though it's one topic, but it's divided, then you could just do that one part. But if it's a different topic, then you don't need the Torah to have divided it. If it's a different topic, you could actually also stop there. And that could be a reason why on Mondays and Thursdays as well, maybe it's different topics, possibly we're stopping where we stop at the end. It could be that the topic ends. So therefore, there could be there is another exception to the rule. We are now holding in the Gemara where the Gemara is going to ask, what about Parshas Tzitzis? Why did they establish Parshas Tzitzis? So we're holding, it must be about 15 lines up from the bottom of the page. We're on page 12b. Parshas Tzitzis mipnei ma kavua. The portion of Tzitzis, why did they establish it? Why did they make it part of the Shema? Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva. Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva says, mipnei sheyesh ba chamisha devarim, because it has 5 things, and on the side it mentions it's really 6 things. It has 5 special elements to it. Mitzvahs tzitzis, it has the mitzvah of tzitzis, It has Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. It has oil mitzvahs, the yoke of doing mitzvahs, doing the commandments. Das minim, it has the obligation to not follow the minim, those that that change the reasons of the Torah and ruin the explanation. Here, her avera, it tells us to stay away from thoughts of sin. V'hir her avodah zara, it tells us to stay away of thoughts of idol worship. And therefore, you've got these 5 special elements of this in this paragraph. So again, let's go over what are the 5. So you have tzitzis, you have yitzias. Tzitzis is the garment that we wear, either a talus or the tzitzis, the undergarment, the garment that's worn under the shirt, or the talus that's worn aboard. So that's the mitzvah of having on a 4-cornered garment. You have the fringes on the side. So that's called the mitzvah of tzitzis. Then you have the next mitzvah is Yitzias Mitzrayim, Exodus from Egypt. That's the second. The third one is the yoke of doing mitzvahs. He mentions it. The fourth is the das minim, to stay away from those that misinterpret the Torah. That's the fourth. Hear her avera, thoughts of sin, stay away from. That's the fifth. Thoughts of idol worship is the sixth. So because of these things, we add the portion of we add this portion to the Shema. Now, why does it call it 5 things and not 6? So there are a few reasons, a few explanations. Either the thought of sin and thought of avodah zarah, that's really one. You could really, that's really counted as one. Another explanation is that Yitzias Mitzrayim, we're automatically going to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, because the Exodus from Egypt is an obvious one. Actually, the misinterpretation of the Torah could also be considered the same as the idol worship. So that's another explanation.
Rabbi Smith.
Just one
Rabbi
second.
Smith.
So I've mentioned now 3 things. 1 second. I mentioned 3 things.
Wait a minute. 1, 2.
And I believe, 1 second, let me just make sure I'm not skipping one. There's another explanation. I think I might have seen one more point.
There's 5. I don't see 6.
So that's what I'm explaining. How do you put the 2 of them are really considered one? Susan, 2 of them are considered one. And the question is, which 2?
No, which I don't know. The which belongs together.
So it could be that the yoke of mitzvahs and the not misinterpreting the Torah, that is one. Okay. And the other is the 2 thoughts of sin and thoughts of idol worship is one. And so there are a number of ways of calculating the reason. And then I mentioned about that the Exodus from Egypt is obvious, and therefore that's not counted.
Rabbi.
Okay, now, yeah, we got a few people want to say something. Okay, one second. I think David Olensky, did you want to say something first? David?
Yeah,
Did
but
you have-
I have background noise. So just real fast, it says in the Steinsaltz, the thoughts of transgression is specifically transgression of licentiousness, which I think has to do with not sneas. I'm not sure, but it's like acting without license. And I
Okay.
think it usually refers to things of sneas, I
Uh-huh.
think.
Okay,
You could
Thank-
get some other
okay, thank
English professors to
Yeah,
ask. But
thank you for adding that, that point. Here, her Avera specifically sins connected to things that are immodest. Okay, thank, Robert.
All right, so the last one I interpret, you had said misread the Torah, but this says heretical opinions. So
Uh-huh.
it's more severe than just misinterpreting it, because essentially evil thoughts, because the other two are then folded into it, which is sinful thoughts and adulterous thoughts. But again, it's heretical in that it keeps you away from any violations of your duty to again observe, the commandments.
Yeah, the general meaning of minos is heretical thoughts.
Okay,
But
all right.
Rashi here, interestingly enough, he doesn't emphasize the heretical thoughts. He mentions that those that change the reasons of the Torah to interpret it wrong.
Huh. Well, then
And
there's
so I didn't, because of that. Now, Rashi
Yeah.
does add one thing. He says also ve'elil, which means to darshan it, to interpret it also to idolatry. So
Right,
that's why
right.
the commentaries want to say that Rashi is maybe connecting the misinterpreting the Torah reason, which is minos, with the idolatrous thoughts, which you would call the heretical thoughts.
right. So it's like
therefore, the
subterfuge.
translation
Right,
of the word minos, the way Rashi is translating it, is not heretical thoughts. Idolatrous thoughts is heretical thoughts. And minos, he's translating as misinterpreting. So I just followed that.
okay, all right.
But you're right. Generally, minos does mean heretical thoughts.
I mean, it's a conscientious effort to insert subterfuge, let's
Right.
call it, okay?
So
So the intent is to hoodwink people or lessen the sinfulness of what you would do. And the other two then make it very clear. It's idolatrous. We all know that adulterous means. And again, sinful is pretty clear. It's to sin or to excuse sinning. Well, anyways, I think we're
Yeah. No, good point. And what you're really right, because minos generally means heretical thoughts.
yeah,
And,
okay.
So it really fits the literal meaning. It generally is connected to that. Yes, Ben. Ben.
To me, it seems that Iru Avera and Iru Avodah Zarah go together because
Which
they are both just in your brain. They are both Iru.
Right. So there is
You're not
one of the
doing
commentaries.
You're not doing Avodah Zarah. You're just thinking about it.
Right.
You're thinking about Avera and you're thinking about Avodah Zarah.
Right.
You're not doing either one of them.
Yeah, but
Right.
you're contemplating that. Thinking is contemplating, which is anticipation of doing something wrong.
Well,
No, just thinking is not anticipation.
well, the difference, Robert, would be what happens if you're not planning on doing it, you're just enjoying the thought. Is that considered a
That's
sin?
a transgression. You're
Well,
not
it's like
supposed to have-
solicitous thinking, okay? It's like you're thinking of something obscene, but you're not acting on it.
Right.
But
But
it's
you're
saying it's
you're
not-
polluting yourself.
Polluting yourself. So is that a sin?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay. So that's why Ben is saying that it's not because you're going to do it. It's the actual
Yes.
thought that's the sin. And I think he's got a point. It's the actual thought that is considered a sin, and that's what it says in the Torah, "B'lo sasuru."
Okay.
So you got a point, Ben. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're planning on doing it, it's obviously even worse. But
Well,
the
the
thought
others
itself
are in your heart.
is a sin. So there is a
comment?
commentary that connects both of those because they're both like in your thoughts, in your heart. Yes. Okay.
Chassidus says that the thought is sometimes in a certain aspect worse than the actual
Right.
sin.
That's
Because
right.
a person
That's
keeps
right.
on thinking it and thinking it and thinking, he's like stewing in it.
It's
It's true, but they go together.
I think it's more than just because it's continuous, David. I think it has to do with the fact that you're blemishing a deeper level of the soul. When you just do an action, it's more external. When you think about sin, you're blemishing more internally.
You're compromising
maybe.
yourself.
Maybe, I don't know. I have to look it up. But in any event, it is brought. Thank you for bringing that up. It is brought down that thoughts of sin are hirhure avera koshim me avera. It's really a Gemara. Hirhure avera koshim me avera. So.
Because you and God are the only ones that know you're doing that.
That's true. That's true.
No,
And so I don't know if that's a reason why it's worse, but it is a sin. It is a serious sin. Thoughts of sin are considered a sin. The Gemara mentions that one of the unique things about Yaakov Avinu, the Medrash mentions it, that he never had a wet dream. His first the first time that semen came out from him was when he impregnated his wife with Reuven, and the first son. And that means that he was quite old at that time. I think it was 84 when his wife gave birth. That means he never had an evil thought, a thought of relationship before that. And so it says, Reuven ata koichi v'reishis oini, you are the first of my strength. And that means the first time that that he had any emission that was impregnating his wife with Reuven. So that's considered quite a feat to accomplish against the evil inclination. Now, the Gemara also says that the reason why we are expected not to have wet dreams at night is because we're supposed to have positive thoughts during the day. That means if a person were to think, improper, immodest thoughts during the day, it'll cause, he's causing himself, even though you're going to say, well, it was a dream. It wasn't my fault. I'm dreaming. What did I do? I didn't do any act, that's improper. The Gemara says, yes, you were thinking about by day. You should keep your mind to clean, pure thoughts during the day, and you won't have, these wet dreams at night. So that's a Gemara maybe that we'll come to in the third.
The interesting thing is, Rabbi, the interesting thing is they're only talking about men with having emissions.
Right.
I mean, to me, it should be the same. Women are not supposed to have thoughts like that either.
Well, the thing is that when a man has such thoughts, he's actually, it could lead to causing seed to be wasted.
Yeah, nocturnal emissions.
And
Right.
by a woman, it's not really considered wasted.
Right.
So therefore, it's more severe for a man.
Right.
At least the actual, but I'm not saying a woman shouldn't have pure thoughts, but I'm just saying the sin, that the severity, it seems to be, at least from my understanding, it seems to be, more of a severe sin for a man. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's equal. Okay. So in any event, we just read the Gemara about the mitzvah of tzitzis, of the portion, the chapter the third chapter of the Shema that mentions the mitzvah of tzitzis, and it mentions other mitzvahs, and therefore the rabbis established it as part of the Shema. But the Gemara asks, what is really the connection of these? Where do you see them in the Shema? The Gemara is wondering, where are these points, these mitzvahs mentioned, and in the third paragraph. So let's continue in the Gemara. Bishloima, it's about 15 lines up from the bottom. Bishloima hani tlas meforsha. It's good. These three are pretty clear in the third portion of the Shema. Oil mitzvahs, the yoke of doing the commandments, the chsiva re'isa, so you should see them. If you see the tzitzis, you will remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. So that includes the yoke of doing mitzvahs. And what does that mean? That when you see the tzitzis are 8 strings, 5 knots, that's 13. And the word tzitzis means 600. So when you look down and you see your tzitzis, you remind yourself that I am a servant of Hashem. I am supposed to do the mitzvahs, or because the strings had, they used to have the dye called the techelas dye, the blue dye or blue-green dye. And therefore you would see it. It would remind you of the, it would remind you of the sea, which reflects the heavens, which reflects the kisei hakavod, the heavenly chariot, and the heavenly throne, and therefore it would remind you of Hashem, and that was the mitzvah of tzitzis, to remind you of all of the mitzvahs. That is the idea of that is where we see the oil, the yoke of mitzvahs. Now comes the mitzvah of tzitzis, this chsiv, because it says, V'asu lahem tzitzis, make for yourself tzitzis. Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus of Egypt, the chsiv, because it says, Asher hoitzeisi v'gomer. At the end of that paragraph, it says, I took you out of Egypt. So what about the other three? Ella das minim, to not misinterpret, to stay away from those that misinterpret the Torah. Hear her avera, thoughts of sin, and hear her avodah zarah, thoughts of idolatrous thoughts. Minolan, where do we see that in the Shema? So the Gemara says, Ditanya, because we learned in a brisa, we learned in a statement from the Tanoim, from the authors of the Mishnah. They authored brisas which were not included in the Mishnah, but they are also a good source. Ditanya, we learned in a brisa, Acharei levavchem zu minus. After your heart, don't turn after your heart. What does that mean? It means zuminus. That means to not follow those that misinterpret the Torah and possibly for their own enjoyment. V'chein hu omer, and it says, Amar novel beliboy ein elokim. The novel, the low person says in his heart, there's no God. And that is exactly the idea of misinterpreting the Torah, changing Hashem's Torah to the opposite. So that is the meaning of someone saying when it says, don't follow your heart, it's followed this idea that it says in the book of Psalms that a person says, that a low life says in his heart, there is no God. Now, the next part of the verse says, don't follow your eyes, what your eyes see. This refers to the sin, the thoughts of sin, that you're following your eyes. Shenemar, as it says, by Yerba Shimshon El Aviv, Samson told his father, Oisa kachli, take her for me. Ki hi yashara be'enai, she is upright in my eyes. So, in other words, his eyes were wanted him to marry this non-Jewish girl, this Pelishtim, this girl from the Pelishtim. That's the hear her avera, thoughts of sin, which is the idea of a nechem, your eyes. Thoughts of sin are connected to your eyes. And then Atem zoinim zehir avidazara. Those that you follow, you're following after, that is the thoughts of idol worship, as it says, they went after the Baalim, after the Baal, which is Avodah Zarah, idol worship. So we have the 6 mitzvahs in the last paragraph of the Shema that make it the reason why the rabbis chose that to add to the Shema, and because they're supposed to be it's supposed to be recited day and night, which we'll soon learn in the next in a few minutes, the next Mishnah we're just up to, and that is the portion of Vayomer. It includes numerous powerful ideas, some general ideas of mitzvahs and so on, and therefore they included Vayomer as part of the Shema. Now, Tosfos over here mentions that the Jerusalem Talmud says that the 3 paragraphs of the Shema are connected to the 10 commandments, that there's a hint to the 10 commandments in the 10 paragraphs, in the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, there's a hint to the 10 commandments in it. And so he doesn't tell you, he says, look there. So I have a Jerusalem Talmud here, and I just wanted to mention what the Talmud says here, the Jerusalem Talmud. It says, why do we read these portions every day in the Shema? And so it says, one of the opinions, Rabbi Levi says, because it has the 10 commandments included in them. Anoichi Hashem Alekecha, the first commandment, I am Hashem your God, is pretty simple. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Alekeinu, Hashem Echad. Right? That's the Shema. That's the first. Now, Lo Yihiyeh Lecha Elekim Acherim Al Panai. There shouldn't be, again, I am Hashem your God is Hashem Alekeinu. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Alekeinu, Hashem is our God. That's the first commandment. There shouldn't be any other gods. Is Hashem Echad. Hashem is one, no other gods.
Right, that's right.
Now, the next commandment, the third commandment, is Loisisa es Shem Hashem Alekecha Lashav. Do not take Hashem's name in vain. And where do we see what is the mitzvah in the Shema that is connected to that? You should love Hashem your God. V'ahavtas Hashem Alekecha. If you love the king, you won't swear in his name in vain. You won't swear falsely. Now, remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy is hinted to in Laman Tizkiru, in order that you remember all of my commandments. And all of my commandments refers to the Shema, refers to the Shabbos. Why does it refer to the Shabbos? Because it's equal to all of the commandments. Keeping Shabbos is equal to all of the commandments. And it brings a verse for that. And the idea is that the mitzvah of Shabbos is so great, it's considered equivalent to all the commandments. And additionally, it also says that when a person desecrates Shabbos, he is considered like one who worships idols in Jewish law. And the reason is, we would not allow them to bring sacrifices. Because if someone who transgresses, desecrates the Shabbos, is just like an idolater. And a person who worships idols, a Jew who worships idols, we don't let them bring sacrifices. The same thing would be, they are considered a renegade. And even though they're only not desecrating Shabbos, but they have the same law, Jewish law, they're considered like they worship idols. So that is the mitzvah of Laman. It's hinted to in the Shema, Laman Tizkiru, in order that you remember to keep all the commandments. That's this mitzvah of Shabbos. What about honoring one's parents? Where is that hinted to in the Shema? So it says that when you honor your parents, you live a long life. So therefore in the Shema it says, Laman Yirbu Yemechem, in order that your days are lengthened, v'yamei v'nechem, and the days of your children will be prolonged. And so if a person honors his parents, he will have longevity. And if his children follow, they will have longevity. So that's hinted to in this verse about honoring one's parents. What about not to kill? Not to kill is hinted to in that if you don't keep my commandments, va'avadatem mehera, you will surely be destroyed from this good land. Now, literally, it means you will be exiled, the simple meaning. But the Gemara translates it as to mean you will be destroyed, because if you kill, you will get killed. And the word that the verse uses is that you will be destroyed from this land, which if you just take the word va'avadatem, you will be destroyed. It sounds like being killed, because the verse could have used you will be exiled. It could have used a different word. It used the word va'avadatem, so it's hinting to the idea of not to kill, because if you killed, you will get killed. In other words, that's the most natural punishment for killing, would be to get killed. So that's hinting to murder. Then
Rabbi
it says,
Smith,
don't, yes.
I'm just thinking that with Shabbos, the Pesukim, Shamar v'Zochar, and if that's representing all the mitzvahs, Shamar and Zochar is mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lo aseh.
Yeah, it's definitely. It's that's a great point. Generally, we say that the positive is Zachar, and Shamar ain't Shamar ella lois aseh. Shamar is always considered a negative. Shamar pen ba'al ain't ella lois aseh. There's a famous Gemara that says always when it says he shomer is always so that would that's a very good point, David. Thanks for bringing that up. There's a positive and negative, and basically the Shabbos is considered equal to all the commandments. And so David just mentioned that if you look in the laws of Shabbos, there's like a hint to that in the Zachar and the Shamor, that it says when Hashem called out the 10 commandments, in one moment, in one uttering, Hashem said both words. A human can't do that because we only have one mouth. But Hashem doesn't speak using a mouth. Therefore, he could say 2 words in 1 second. And he said the word Zachar and Shamor. And therefore, in Parshas Yisro, which is this week's Parsha, where we have the 10 commandments, actually, it's very apropos that we're learning this Gemara this week, that it says in Parshas Yisro, it says one of those words, Shamor, Zachar. And in Parshas V'aschanan, it says Shamor. So therefore, David is saying it's a hint to the entire Torah, all the positive commandments, all the negative commandments. Thank you, David. So the next one is loisinaf, don't commit adultery, and that's what we just mentioned really in our Gemara about v'loisasuru acharei levavchem acharei einechem, don't go after your heart and your eyes, and that's Reb Levi says the heart and the eyes are the 2 intermediaries of sin, the 2 like when you have a broker, it's like the middleman. The middleman for sin is the heart and the eyes. That's the middleman. And Hashem says, it said the Gemara here, the Gemara Yushalmi, it brings, Hashem said, if you give me your heart and your eyes, I know that you are mine and will not act immorally. So this is referring to V'lo sasuru. So that's hinting not to commit adultery. The 8th commandment is not to steal, and that is hinted to alluded to in the word v'asafta digonecha in the Shema. You will gather your grain, meaning your grain you should gather, not someone else's grain. So that's a hint to not steal. And loisana breacha et shaker, don't bear false witness against your fellow. And that is hinted to and alluded to in Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Ani Hashem Elokeichem. And it says Hashem Elokim Emes. Hashem, your God, is true. And so we combine that by ending off the Shema with the word Emes. And this alludes to the prohibition against bearing false witness, because Hashem is true. We must emulate him and speak only the truth. And then the Gemara says, the Gemara continues really on that thought. It says, what is the true? What is the meaning of true? So it says he is the living God and eternal King. That's the meaning of true, and they explain on the bottom here that it's an explanation. God is true. He is the living God and the eternal King. That the latter part of the verse is not a separate clause. It's the explanation of the first part. So the verse means Hashem is the only true being. He is true because he is eternal and is the source of all life. Everything else exists only through his will. And since nothing besides him exists objectively and independently, only his existence can be described as true. And there is a acronym. MS stands for Elokim Melech Tamid. Hashem is king forever. Elokim Melech Tamid. That's an interesting acronym. When you say the word MS, you can think of that. Elokim Melech Tamid. That Hashem is king forever. Anyway, so the Gemara continues and it says, Reb Levi said that Hashem says, if you testify falsely against your fellow, I will consider it as if you testified against me that I did not create heaven and earth. So in any event, the point is that the mitzvah of not bearing false witness is hinted to in the end of the Shema, in the end of the last paragraph. And then it says not to covet, do not covet. That's the final commandment. And where do we see you should not covet? So it says you should write them on the doorpost of your house and not your friend's house. That meaning that you shouldn't covet your friend's house. Now, what does it mean not to covet? It means not to force your friend to sell it to you. That's really what the prohibition against coveting is, coercing him to sell. So when it says you should put it on the doorposts of your house, but not that of your fellow's house, meaning you shouldn't coerce him to sell you his house and put the mezuzah on his house. Okay, so that really is that's the point that Tosfos makes. Very interesting. So now when we say the Shema, we actually can think of the 10 Commandments. Okay, we're now up to the next Mishnah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, could you just say again what is MS supposed to stand for?
Well, MS is Elokim Melech Tamid.
Melech Tamid. Okay, thank you.
I've never heard that before. It's the first time. It's from this Yerushalmi. So I'm just saying it's not like not common knowledge. Nice, something new. Elokim Melech Tamid. Very interesting point. It's not even in the Yerushalmi. It's in the commentary on the Yerushalmi. One of the commentaries on the Yerushalmi. Now we're up to the next Mishnah. We're on page Yud Beis, Amud Beis, page 12b. We're at the final Mishnah of the chapter.
Rabbi Smith.
Yes.
I just wanted to say in the Steinsaltz, when it says Atem Zonim, you shall not stray after her. Right. So he says this is referring to promiscuity, which in the language of the prophets is a metaphor for idol worship. So in other words, you shall not stray after her. It says it's referring to not tznius, to promiscuity, but in the language of the Nevi'im, it's a mashal it's a metaphor, it's a nimshal for idol worship.
Thank you. That's very interesting. That mainly zoina means promiscuity, and it's just a mashal because when you worship an idol, you're like living with another person. It's like you're desecrating our marriage to Hashem, and we're choosing another husband instead of Hashem, or another wife instead of Hashem. Hashem is right. Either way, generally it's we think of Hashem as our husband. But thank you. That's an interesting point. That Zoinim literally is really the hearer of Avera, of immodest, of thinking immodest thoughts and going after them. But it hints to the idea of idol worship. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. We're now at the Mishnah, and we're talking about the Exodus from Egypt. When does it need to be said? And many of you know this Mishnah. We all know this Mishnah because we say it in the Haggadah on Passover night. Mazkirin Yetzias Mitzrayim Baleilos. We mention the Exodus from Egypt at night. It's not just a mitzvah to do by day, it's a mitzvah to do at night as well. Amar Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says, Harei ani keven shivim shana. I am like I'm 70 years old. And the reason he said he's 70 is because he wasn't 70. He's only 18. But he's 70 because the different opinions why he's 70, but because Hashem gave him the wisdom and gave him gave him white strands of hair that made him look like he was 70. And therefore it's considered that he was 70. And yet, even though Hashem gave him that special blessing of wisdom, he did not merit to prove that you need to mention the Exodus from Egypt at night. He wasn't able to prove it. He couldn't find the source. He knew you had to, but he couldn't find the source for it. Until Ben Zayma came, Darsha Ben Zayma. In Ben Zayma Shenemar, and he brought a verse, as it says in the Pasuk, Laman Tizkos Yom Tzeischam Eretz Mitzrayim, in order that you remember the Exodus of Egypt. Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life. So it says that in the verse, in order that you remember the Exodus of Egypt all the days of your life. So he explains, what does it mean, all the days of your life? So the days of your life means the days. Yemei Chayecha Hayamim. Kol Yemei Chayecha. Why does it say all the days of your life? That includes the nights. Haleilos. And the rabbis say, Yemei Chayecha Olam Hazeh. It means this world. Kol Lahavi L'maisa Mashiach. All the days of your life includes the days when Mashiach comes, that you might think, what are we going to mention? The Exodus from Egypt then. We're going to mention the future Exodus, that we got out of this exile that we're in. And now we're going to talk about getting out of COVID. We're going to talk about that when Mashiach comes. But the Mishnah says we're also going to mention the Exodus from Egypt. We're going to mention even then, even after Mashiach comes, we're still going to remember that we left Egypt. Now, I should mention there are other explanations why he says, I'm 70. Another explanation is that he studied Torah so much that his hours of Torah, the amount of hours he put into studying Torah, was like he was a 70-year-old who studied Torah 9 to 5. He studied Torah, maybe 6 in the morning till 3 a.m. He studied so many hours that his amount of Torah equaled, in his 18 years, he equaled those that were 70 years old. That's another explanation, is that he's 70 because he was a Gilgul of Shmuel Hanavi, who lived 52 years, and he was 18. So if you add 18 and 52, he's 70 years old, because he is a reincarnation of Shmuel Hanavi. I'm just remembering some stuff from the Haggadah and sharing it. Maybe some of you have other insights. You're welcome to share, but that's just a few of them. Okay, so the Gemara now says, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Amar lehem Ben Zayma. Ben Zayma told l'chachamim, to the rabbis, you're really going to mention the Exodus of Egypt when Mashiach comes? Are we really going to mention it? And
Rabbi, I just want to mention a real fast thing from the Rebbe quotes from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the language of it should have been Larabos, Kol Yemei Chayach Larabos, Yemos Mashiach, but it says Lahavi, to bring. Right. So indicating that the days of a person's life are to bring the days of Mashiach, the time of Mashiach, not just to include it in its technical mentioning here. So that's why they didn't use the word Larabos, but Lahavi.
All the days of our life, we are supposed to lead up to Yemais HaMashiach. We're supposed to bring Mashiach. We're supposed to be thinking about bringing Mashiach, concentrating on it. It's a beautiful word. Thank you. So the Gemara says that Ben Zoyma told the rabbis, are you going to mention? Now, do we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim at night? Do we mention the Exodus of Egypt at night? We do, because we say the third paragraph of Shema at night. So the Mishnah is really telling us that you're supposed to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, and that means that in the Shema, we're supposed to mention all three paragraphs. Even though at night is not a time of tzitzis, but it has Yetzias Mitzrayim in it. So even though it's not necessarily a mitzvah for its main, in other words, the main purpose of the main point of that paragraph is tzitzis, and it might not apply at night according to the opinions that explain that a garment, when you wear it at night, that's four corners, is not obligated. You're not obligated in tzitzis. Nevertheless, we say the Shema because the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt. Now, so the Gemara says that Ben Zoyma told the rabbis, do you mention Yetzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes? V'haloik far namar, doesn't it say, Hine yamim bayim, there are days that are coming, Nu'um Hashem, from Hashem. V'lo yoimru oid chai Hashem, we will not say anymore how great is Hashem, may Hashem live, Asher halos b'nei Yisrael, that took us out of Egypt, may Eretz Mitzrayim, he took up the Bnei Yisrael, may Eretz Mitzrayim from Egypt. Kiyim, rather, what are we going to say when Mashiach comes? Chai Hashem Asher Hela. Great is Hashem that he took us up, Vasher Hevi, and he brought us, as Zerah Beis Yisrael, may Eretz Safaina, from the north, and we call Ha'arotzois, and from all the lands Asher Hidachtim Sham, that we were distributed there. We were that we were scattered. Amru Loi, so the rabbis told Ben Zoyma that, yeah, the verse sounds like it sounds like it's saying you're not going to mention it at all, but that's not really the meaning. It doesn't mean we're going to totally remove the Exodus from Egypt from its place. Rather, it means that the subjugation to kings, to the kingdoms that we are going to be exempt from, that's going to be the main thing we're going to mention. V'yetzias Mitzrayim tafeloi, and we won't make a big deal. It'll be less of a deal, the Exodus from Egypt, but it'll still be there. We're still going to mention it. It's just not going to be as the main mention. The main mention is going to be the Exodus, the redemption from the exiles that we're in. And the side on the side point we'll mention on the side that we're thanking Hashem for taking us out of Egypt. Ki yoytze boy ata omer, we find a similar thing. Lo yikari shimcha oid Yaakov, ki yem Yisrael. Your name should not be anymore Jacob. Rather, it'll be Israel, Yisrael. Yeshemecha. Ki yem Yisrael, Yeshemecha. Yisrael will be your name. And now we've just turned to page 13a. 13a, everyone. It doesn't mean that Yaakov is not going to be mentioned anymore at all, because we find that even Hashem calls Yaakov after he goes to Egypt. It says Hashem said to Israel, there's a verse and it says Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov, and Hashem called Yaakov, Yaakov, and he says Vayomer Hineni, he says, here I am. So we see Hashem says the term Yaakov afterwards. So it doesn't mean he's not going to mention Yaakov anymore at all. Ela Yisrael Iker v'Yaakov Tafeloi. Rather, it means that Yisrael will be the main name and Yaakov will be secondary to it. And we have a verse that we're going to stop here. We'll do this Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful day.